I found my wife's wedding ring in her car that Tuesday morning. After 23 years of marriage, she'd never taken it off. Not once. But there it was, sitting in the cup holder like it meant nothing. I'm a locksmith. I know when something doesn't belong where it should be. My name is Kevin Barnes. I'm 49 years old, and I've been in the locksmith business for over 20 years. Started small, just me in a beat-up van, answering emergency calls at all hours. Now I run Barnes Security Solutions, the most trusted locksmith service in 3 counties. Folks call me when they're locked out of their cars at 2 a.m., when they've lost their house keys, or when they need their entire security system upgraded. I've built a solid reputation on being reliable, honest, and available when people need me most. My wife Ashley is 45, works as a dental hygienist downtown. We met at a community barbecue back in '01, hit it off over terrible potato salad and warm beer. She had this laugh that could light up a room, and she wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty helping clean up afterward. That's the kind of woman she was. Or at least, that's who I thought she was. Our son Mason just turned 22, graduated from college last spring with a degree in computer science. Kid's got his head on straight. Works for a tech startup in Denver now. When he was growing up, Ashley and I used to joke that we were the perfect team. I could get into any locked door, and she could fix anyone's smile. The morning that changed, everything started like any other Tuesday. I was in the garage, organizing my equipment for the day's calls when my phone buzzed. Emergency lockout at the Riverside Shopping Center. Nothing unusual there, except when I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door, I noticed Ashley's car was still in the driveway. She'd left for work an hour ago, or so I thought. Her purse was gone, her coffee mug was in the sink, and she'd kissed me goodbye like always. But there was her silver Honda, sitting right where she'd parked it the night before. I walked over and tried the door, unlocked. That was strange. Ashley was paranoid about locking her car, had been ever since someone broke into her friend's vehicle at the mall. I popped my head inside to see if maybe she'd forgotten something important. That's when I saw it. Her wedding ring, sitting in the cup holder like it belonged there. Not on the dashboard where it might have slipped off, not in the console where she might have put it for safekeeping. Right there in plain sight, like she'd deliberately taken it off and set it down. I picked it up, turned it over in my palm. The inscription inside still read, "Forever yours, K&A, 2001. I'd saved for months to buy that ring, and she'd worn it every single day for over 2 decades. Ashley didn't take off her jewelry, period. She even wore it in the shower, said it felt wrong without it. Standing there in our driveway, holding my wife's wedding ring while her car sat empty in front of our house, I felt something shift in my chest. It wasn't anger yet, just a cold, creeping realization that something was very, very wrong. I slipped the ring into my pocket and headed back inside. Ashley would be home around 6, same as always, and I wanted to see how she'd handle my questions. The emergency call could wait 5 minutes. This was more important. When Ashley walked through the front door that evening, she looked perfectly normal. Hair still neat from work. That familiar smile when she saw me sitting at the kitchen table. She dropped her purse by the door and headed straight for the refrigerator. "How was your day?" Ashley asked, pulling out ingredients for dinner. "Good. Had that lockout at Riverside. Then Mrs. Peterson needed her deadbolts changed." I kept my tone casual, but my eyes were on her hands. Sure enough, no wedding ring. "Hey, quick question. I was moving your car this morning and found something interesting." Ashley paused, her hand halfway to the cabinet. Just for a second, but I caught it. "Oh," she said, turning around with that bright smile. "What kind of interesting?" I pulled the ring from my pocket and set it on the counter between us. "Care to explain why this was sitting in your cup holder?" For just a moment, Ashley's face went blank. Then she laughed, but it sounded forced, like she was reading from script. "Oh my God, I'm such an airhead," Ashley said, reaching for the ring. "I took it off at the gym yesterday. You know how I hate getting soap buildup under it when I wash my hands. I must have forgotten to put it back on." She slipped it on her finger like nothing had happened, but something felt off about the whole performance. "Which gym?" I asked. "Thought you'd been going to that new place on Oak Street." "Right, yeah, Oak Street Fitness," Ashley replied quickly. "They have those really harsh antibacterial dispensers everywhere. Dries out my skin, something awful." I nodded like I believed her, but my mind was already working. Ashley had been going to the women-only gym on Riverside Drive for 3 years. She'd never mentioned any place on Oak Street, and I drove past that area regularly for work. There wasn't a gym there. Well, glad you didn't lose it, I said, standing up. I'm gonna grab a beer. Want anything? Just water, thanks. As I walked to the refrigerator, I caught Ashley's reflection in the microwave door. She was staring at her hand, twisting the ring like she was making sure it fit right. When she noticed me watching, she quickly busied herself with chopping vegetables. That night, I lay awake long after Ashley fell asleep beside me. 23 years of marriage, and I'd never known her to lie about something so simple. The gym story didn't add up, and her reaction when I'd asked about it felt rehearsed. I'm a man who makes his living understanding how things work, how they break, and how to fix them. But lying there in the dark, listening to my wife breathe, I realized I might be dealing with something that couldn't be unlocked with any tool I owned. The next morning, I made a decision that went against every instinct I developed over 2 decades of marriage. I called my buddy Rick Martinez, a guy I'd known since high school who now ran a private investigation firm downtown. "Rick, it's Kevin Barnes," I said when he picked up. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to keep it between us." "Shoot," Rick replied. I could hear papers shuffling in the background. If someone wanted to track their spouse's movements, hypothetically, what would be the most reliable way to do it? There was a pause. "Kevin, you okay, man? Just answer the question." Rick sighed. "GPS tracker, magnetic mount, battery life of about 2 weeks, real-time updates to your phone. But if you're asking what I think you're asking, how much?" I interrupted. $200 for the device, another $50 for the app setup. "But listen to me. I'll be there in an hour." I hung up before Rick could launch into whatever lecture he had prepared. I'd been in the security business long enough to know that when something doesn't feel right, you investigate. And my gut was telling me Ashley was hiding something big. Rick's office was in a strip mall between a tax service and a dry cleaner. When I walked in, he was waiting with a small black box on his desk. "Before I hand this over," Rick said, "you need to understand what you're getting into. Once you start down this road, there's no going back." "I'm already down the road," I replied. "Just need to know where it leads." Rick opened the box, revealing a device about the size of a matchbook. Attaches under the car with magnets. Updates every 5 minutes. Battery indicator on the app. If she's going somewhere she shouldn't, you'll know. And if she's not, then you owe your wife an apology and me a beer. I paid cash and drove home with the tracker in my jacket pocket. Ashley's car was gone. She'd left for work an hour earlier. I crawled under her Honda, found a clean spot on the frame, and attached the device. Took me less than 30 seconds. That evening, Ashley came home at her usual time, chattering about her day like nothing had changed. But when she went to take her shower, I opened the tracking app on my phone. There was Ashley's car, represented by a blue dot on a map of our neighborhood. "Tomorrow," I muttered to myself, "we'll see just how honest you've been." Thursday morning arrived with clear skies and a knot in my stomach. Ashley left for work at 7:30 sharp, same as always. She kissed my cheek, grabbed her coffee, and told me she had a busy day ahead. "Might be late again," Ashley said, pausing at the door. "Dr. Reynolds has 3 root canals scheduled, and you know how those run over." "No problem," I replied. "I'll grab dinner for myself." The moment her car disappeared around the corner, I opened the tracking app. The blue dot moved through town exactly as expected, down Maple Street, left on Harrison, straight toward the dental office downtown. For a moment, I thought maybe I was wrong about everything. Then the dot stopped, not at the dental office, but at Murphy's Diner 3 blocks away. I grabbed my keys and headed out. Murphy's was a local spot, nothing fancy, the kind of place where mechanics grab coffee and retirees played cards. I parked across the street with a clear view of the entrance. Ashley's Honda was in the lot, but she wasn't inside getting breakfast. I waited 20 minutes before she emerged, but she wasn't alone. The man walking beside her was tall, maybe 6'1", with graying hair and an expensive-looking suit. He had his hand on the small of Ashley's back as they walked to their cars, and when they stopped beside her Honda, he leaned down and kissed her. Not a friendly peck, a real kiss, the kind married people share. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. 23 years of marriage, and I was watching my wife kiss another man in broad daylight. They talked for another minute before getting into separate cars. Ashley drove toward the dental office while the man headed in the opposite direction. I memorized his license plate, old habits from my security work. I followed Ashley to her office and watched her walk inside like nothing had happened. She straightened her hair in the reflection of the glass door, checked her lipstick, and disappeared into the building. The tracking app showed she stayed there all day, but I knew the truth now. My wife was having an affair, and she was confident enough to meet her lover in public, in our own town. That evening, Ashley came home at 6, same as always. "How was work?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Exhausting," Ashley replied, dropping in her favorite chair. "Dr. Reynolds had us running all day. I barely had time for lunch." Another lie. I'd seen her having what looked like a very intimate breakfast with her boyfriend. "That's rough," I said. "Maybe this weekend we can do something relaxing. Just the two of us." Ashley smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That sounds nice, honey." I nodded and headed to the garage. I had some planning to do. I spent the next 2 weeks documenting everything. Every lie, every inconsistency, every time Ashley claimed to be somewhere she wasn't. The GPS tracker became my most valuable tool, telling me a story my wife never intended me to read. Tuesday afternoon, I decided it was time to take this to the next level. I called Sarah Morrison, the best divorce attorney in the county. Her reputation was solid. She protected her clients' interests and didn't mess around. "Mr. Barnes," Sarah said when I walked into her office, "Rick Martinez called and gave me a heads up about your situation. What can I do for you?" I handed her a manila folder containing everything I collected. Photos of Ashley and her boyfriend at Murphy's Diner, GPS logs showing her trips to locations that had nothing to do with work, timestamps proving she'd lied about working late. Sarah reviewed the evidence methodically, occasionally nodding or making notes in the margins. "This is comprehensive," she said finally. "Your wife has been careless, and you've been thorough. How do you want to proceed?" "I want to protect myself financially," I replied. "The business, the house, my retirement accounts. I built Barnes Security Solutions from nothing, and I'm not losing it because she decided to throw away our marriage." Sarah walked me through the process. Asset protection, filing procedures, what to expect during negotiations. Most importantly, she explained how to legally move money without triggering any alerts. "The key is preparation," Sarah said. "Document everything, secure your assets, and when you're ready to file, we'll have all our ammunition in order." I opened a new checking account at First National, across town from our usual bank. Transferred exactly half of our joint savings, completely legal since both names were on the account. I also pulled my name off several recurring bills and made copies of all our financial statements. Over the next week, I started quietly moving my personal belongings. Nothing obvious, just things that mattered. My father's tools, photo albums from before Ashley, my collection of vintage lock mechanisms. I rented a storage unit on the other side of town and moved everything in small loads. Ashley was too wrapped up in her affair to notice. She came home each evening with new stories about difficult patients, equipment breakdowns, and mysterious overtime requirements. Each lie made my decision easier. Friday evening, I made one final addition to my evidence file. I'd followed Ashley to a different location, the Marriott downtown. She met the same man in the lobby, and they took the elevator to the 15th floor together. I photographed them through the lobby window, her hand in his as they walked toward the elevators. The timestamp on my camera read 6:47 p.m. At 7:15, Ashley texted me, "Still at the office. Dr. Reynolds is dealing with an emergency patient. Don't wait up." That night, I reviewed everything one more time. Photos, GPS logs, financial records, and a detailed timeline of Ashley's deception. I had enough evidence to bury her in court, and I'd protected everything that mattered to me. It was time for the final phase of my plan. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that usually made me grateful to be alive. But today, it felt like an ending rather than a beginning. Ashley was humming in the kitchen, making her coffee with the same routine she'd followed for 23 years. "Big day ahead," Ashley announced, not looking up from her phone. "Dr. Reynolds scheduled back-to-back root canals, and you know how those patients get." "Sounds rough," I replied, watching her fingers dance across her phone screen. Probably texting her boyfriend about their next rendezvous. Ashley kissed my cheek, the same mechanical peck she'd been giving me for months, and headed for the door. "Don't wait up if I'm late," she called over her shoulder. "This might be another long one." "Take your time," I said, knowing it would be the last conversation we'd ever have as husband and wife. I waited exactly 30 minutes after her car disappeared, then went to work. I've been planning this moment for weeks, and every detail was calculated. I pulled out the manila envelope I prepared and placed it on Ashley's pillow. Inside were the divorce papers Sarah had drafted, signed, and notarized. On top of the papers, I placed a photograph Rick had taken of Ashley and her boyfriend kissing outside the Marriott Hotel. Their faces were clearly visible, their body language unmistakable. Next to the envelope, I placed my wedding ring. 23 years of marriage, reduced to a simple gold band sitting on white cotton pillowcases. Finally, I left a handwritten note on hotel stationery I'd picked up during one of my surveillance trips. When she came home, I was gone. All I left was an envelope, a photo, and my wedding ring. Don't look for me. I walked through our house one final time, not out of nostalgia, but to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything important. The family photos on the mantel would stay. They belonged to a life that no longer existed. The furniture, the decorations, the accumulated weight of 2 decades, all of it felt like artifacts from someone else's marriage. I loaded the last of my tools into my truck and drove to the apartment I'd been preparing for 3 weeks. It wasn't much, a 1-bedroom place above Martinez Electronics, but it was mine, paid for with money Ashley knew nothing about. My phone was the final step. I removed the SIM card, snapped it in half, and tossed it in a dumpster behind the apartment building. No phone meant no way for Ashley to reach me, no opportunity for explanations or manipulation. At 6:30 p.m., my old life officially ended. Ashley would walk into our bedroom, see the evidence of her betrayal displayed on her pillow, and realize that her husband had vanished without giving her a chance to explain or apologize. I cracked open a beer and sat by the window of my new apartment, watching the sun set over a town where Ashley Barnes would now have to face the consequences of her choices alone. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I didn't have to wait long to see the results of my disappearing act. Rick called me the next evening on the burner phone I'd given him for emergencies. "Kevin, what the hell did you do?" Rick asked when I picked up. Ashley showed up at my office this morning looking like she'd seen a ghost. She was crying, asking if I knew where you were. "What did you tell her?" I asked, settling into the chair by my apartment window. "That I hadn't heard from you in weeks. But man, she was desperate. Said she'd found some papers and photos on her bed, and you just vanished. She wanted to hire me to find you." I chuckled. "I bet she did. What was your response?" I told her I don't take cases involving friends, and that maybe she should think about why her husband felt the need to disappear in the first place. Good old Rick. He understood loyalty. "She's been calling your office too," Rick continued. "Martinez Electronics said you'd resigned effective immediately. No forwarding address, no contact information. Kevin, you really burned every bridge, didn't you?" "That was the point," I replied. "Clean break. No breadcrumbs to follow." 3 days later, my son Mason called the burner phone. His voice was tight, confused. "Dad, what's going on?" Mason said. "Mom called me crying, saying you'd left her some kind of divorce papers and just disappeared. She's talking about hiring lawyers, private investigators. She sounds completely panicked. Can you meet me somewhere?" I asked. "Just us. There are things you need to know." We met at Denny's on the interstate, 20 miles from our old neighborhood. Mason was already waiting in a corner booth when I arrived, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the past week. "Dad, Mom says you're having some kind of breakdown," Mason said as I sat down. "She says she found papers and photos that don't make sense, and that you just vanished without explanation." I pulled out a manila folder and placed it on the table between us. "Your mother has been having an affair for months. These are the photos and evidence I collected before I decided to leave." Mason stared at the folder like it might explode. Slowly, he opened it and looked at the first photograph. Ashley and her boyfriend kissing outside the Marriott Hotel. His face went through several expressions. Confusion, disbelief, then a slow, burning anger. "How long?" Mason asked quietly. "At least 4 months that I can prove. Probably longer." Mason flipped through the rest of the evidence. GPS logs, hotel receipts, more photographs. When he finished, he leaned back in the booth and rubbed his face with his hands. "I can't believe she did this," Mason said finally. 23 years, and she threw it all away for some random guy. "His name is Dr. Richard Lawson," I said. "He's a cardiologist at St. Mary's Hospital, married with 2 kids of his own." Mason looked up sharply. "She's sleeping with a married man?" "Apparently so." We sat in silence for a moment before Mason spoke again. What happens now? Now you decide what kind of relationship you want with your mother, I said. I'm not going to influence that decision, but you deserve to know the truth. Mason nodded slowly. Can I keep these copies? They're yours. As I drove back to my apartment that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The truth was out. My son knew what kind of woman his mother really was, and I was free to build whatever came next. 6 months after vanishing from my old life, I was building something better. The divorce had been finalized without me ever having to see Ashley face to face. Sarah Morrison handled everything through the courts, and Ashley's attorney quickly realized they had no leverage against the mountain of evidence I provided. I kept the house, the business, and most of our assets. Ashley got her car, her personal belongings, and half of what remained after legal fees. She also got to explain to everyone in town why her husband of 23 years had disappeared overnight. Barnes Security Solutions became my salvation. Working with my hands, solving problems, helping people protect what mattered to them. It reminded me why I'd gotten into this business in the first place. Word spread quickly about my reliability and discretion, and soon I had more work than I could handle. The apartment above Martinez Electronics wasn't meant to be permanent, so I started looking for something bigger. I found a small house on the outskirts of town with a detached garage I could convert into a proper workshop. It needed work, but I had the skills and the time to make it mine. Mason visited regularly. He decided to cut contact with Ashley completely after seeing the evidence of her affair. I can't respect someone who lies that easily. Mason told me one Saturday, while helping me install new security cameras around my property. If she could lie to you for months about something that big, what else has she been lying about? It was a fair question. I'd raised a son with strong principles, and Ashley's betrayal violated everything we'd taught him about honesty and commitment. I also started dating again, though I took it slow. There was a woman named Carol who ran the bookstore downtown. She was divorced herself, understood the importance of taking time to heal, and appreciated a man who could fix things when they broke. You don't talk much about your ex-wife, Carol mentioned one evening after I'd repaired the lock on her store's back door. Not much to say, I replied. Sometimes people show you who they really are, and you have to decide whether that's someone you want in your life. Carol nodded. She'd been through her own betrayal and understood the value of starting fresh. The best part about my new life was the simplicity. No more wondering where Ashley was or what she was really doing. No more analyzing every conversation for hidden meanings. No more pretending to believe obvious lies. I worked, I spent time with my son, I slowly got to know Carol better, and I built a life based on honesty and respect rather than deception and betrayal. Rick told me Ashley had moved in with Dr. Lawson after his wife divorced him and took half his assets. Apparently, their affair had become public knowledge when his wife hired her own private investigator. She got what she wanted, Rick said. But from what I hear, Lawson's not handling the divorce well. Lost his house, his kids won't speak to him, and the hospital's been asking questions about his conduct. I felt no satisfaction in hearing about their problems. Their relationship had been built on lies and betrayal. It was always going to collapse eventually. What mattered was that I'd gotten out before it could destroy me too. 2 years after walking away from my marriage, I proposed to Carol at the same bookstore where we'd first really talked. She said yes without hesitation, and we planned a simple ceremony that reflected who we'd both become, people who valued substance over show. The wedding was small but meaningful. Mason stood as my best man. Carol's daughter Emma was her maid of honor, and we exchanged vows in the garden behind her bookstore. No fancy venue, no expensive decorations, just two people who'd found each other after surviving betrayal and learning what real partnership looked like. Kevin Barnes, Carol said during her vows, you taught me that a man's words should mean something, and that love isn't about grand gestures. It's about showing up every day and telling the truth. I never felt more proud to hear my name spoken aloud. Barnes Security Solutions had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. I'd hired 2 employees, expanded into commercial consulting, and developed a reputation as the guy who could solve problems other companies couldn't handle. The business gave me purpose, and the income gave Carol and me the freedom to build our life exactly how we wanted it. We bought a house together, not the one Ashley and I had shared, but a craftsman-style place with good bones that needed work. Carol and I spent weekends refinishing floors, updating the kitchen, and installing a security system that would make Fort Knox jealous. Working together on something that belonged to both of us felt like the opposite of everything my first marriage had become. Mason finished college and moved back to town, taking a job with a tech company that let him work remotely. He'd visit Carol and me for dinner every Sunday, and we'd talk about his work, his girlfriend, and plans for the future. Ashley never came up in conversation unless Mason brought her up, which happened less and less often. She moved again. Mason mentioned one Sunday while helping me install motion sensors around her new property. Third time since you left. Apparently, things didn't work out with the tire shop guy either. That's unfortunate, I said, meaning it. I didn't want Ashley to suffer. I just didn't want her chaos affecting my life anymore. She asked me to tell you that she understands now why you left the way you did. Mason continued. Said she knows she broke something that couldn't be fixed. I nodded but didn't respond. Understanding was good, but it didn't change anything. I'd build a better life with a woman who shared my values, and no amount of Ashley's hindsight could improve on that. Carol emerged from the house carrying lemonade and homemade cookies, the kind of simple gesture that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with her. She handed Mason a glass and kissed my cheek before settling beside me on the porch steps. What are you two plotting out here? Carol asked with a smile. Just making sure nobody can get through our defenses, I replied, putting my arm around her. Good, she said. I like feeling safe. That night, lying next to Carol in our bed, I reflected on how different my life had become. Instead of wondering where my partner was or what she was really doing, I knew exactly where Carol was and trusted completely that she wanted to be there. Sometimes the best security system is just choosing the right person to trust with the keys. 7 years after I disappeared from Ashley's life, Mason called with news that changed everything. Dad, I'm getting married, Mason announced, his voice full of excitement. Angela said yes, and we're planning the wedding for next spring. I'd met Angela several times. A smart, kind woman who worked as a nurse and made Mason laugh in ways I hadn't seen since he was a kid. They'd been together for 2 years, and it was obvious they were building something solid. That's wonderful news, son, I said. Carol and I couldn't be happier for you both. There's something else, Mason said, his tone becoming more serious. I need to ask you about the guest list. Angela thinks we should invite Mom for family unity and all that, but I want to check with you first. I considered this carefully. 7 years of no contact with Ashley, 7 years of building a life she had no part in. But this was Mason's day, and he deserved to have both parents there if that's what he wanted. It's your wedding, Mason, I replied. Invite whoever you want. I can handle being in the same room as your mother for a few hours. The wedding was beautiful. Mason and Angela exchanged vows at a country club outside town, surrounded by friends and family. Carol and I sat in the second row, dressed in our best clothes and feeling proud of the man Mason had become. Ashley was there, sitting several rows behind us with a man I didn't recognize. She looked older, thinner, and less confident than the woman I'd been married to for 23 years. When our eyes met briefly during the ceremony, she nodded politely but didn't attempt to approach. During the reception, the photographer gathered family groups for formal pictures. Mason insisted on a photo with Carol and me together, both of us smiling broadly with our arms around his shoulders. You two look happy, the photographer commented while adjusting his camera settings. How long have you been married? 5 years, Carol replied, but it feels like we've been together forever. Later that evening, Mason posted the wedding photos on his social media accounts. The picture of Carol, Mason, and me became his profile photo. 3 people who genuinely enjoyed being together, celebrating a moment of pure happiness. According to Mason, Ashley saw the photo and called him crying. She'd apparently expected the wedding to be some kind of reconciliation opportunity, a chance to reconnect with the family she'd lost when I disappeared. Instead, she'd watched her ex-husband and his new wife celebrate her son's wedding while she sat with a stranger, having played no meaningful role in raising the man Mason had become. She said seeing you with Carol made her realize what she'd thrown away. Mason told me a few days later. But Dad, you look happier than I ever remember seeing you. Like you finally found where you belong. He was right. 7 years after walking away from a marriage built on lies, I found something real with Carol. We'd built Barn Security Solutions into a thriving business, created a home filled with laughter and trust, and become the kind of couple that made other people believe and love again. Ashley had made her choice when she decided to betray our marriage. I'd made mine when I chose to disappear rather than fight for something that was already broken. Looking at that wedding photo, seeing Mason's joy and Carol's genuine smile, I knew I'd made the right decision. Sometimes the strongest thing a man can do is walk away from what's destroying him and build something better. When she came home that night 7 years ago, I was gone. All I'd left was an envelope, a photo, and my wedding ring. At our son's wedding, she saw me and was shocked to discover I'd never looked back.